Welcome back to Hannity. Now, we've uncovered some chilling footage of the future 40th president of the U.S. appearing on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Now, this was back in 1975. Now, although it was 38 years ago, the message delivered that night by Ronald Reagan about the federal debt, deficit, taxes, it sounds as though could have been said last night. Watch this.
I still say that the answer to our problems in this country, even at the national level, is to have a law that says there is a percentage limit of the people's earnings that government cannot go beyond without the consent of the people. We ought to have tax reform, and we ought to start by making it so simple that you don't have to hire a lawyer to find out how much you owe every year.
That's for sure. It used to be a little simplified, but not anymore.
Johnny, we live in the only country in the world where it takes more brains to figure out your income tax than it does to earn the income. When they give me a choice between a $53 billion deficit in the budget and an $80 billion deficit, when budget deficits are what's causing inflation, I don't see that there's any room to be on either side of that argument.
Yeah,
I think the answer to curing inflation is a balanced budget.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you balance the budget?
Well, balancing the budget is like protecting
You don't
your
spend more than you take in, right?
Yeah, it's like protecting your virtue. You have to learn to say no.
All right, here was reaction the author of America, Hope for Change, former Maryland Governor Bob Ehrlich, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Juan, what part of that stood out in your mind? There's one thing that really stood out to me, and I wonder if you caught it. You know what it is?
Well, he's a wonderful guy. I mean, he's a charmer, but
No.
I think the part that stood out to me was he said, you know, you should have tax reform. It should be so simple that anybody can file their taxes without hiring all these crazy accountants.
Bob, what stood out to you? Because there's one thing that really stood out to me.
Common sense.
Yeah, common sense. All right. He's talking about a $53 billion budget deficit, not a $1.3 or $4 trillion budget deficit, right?
Chump change today, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Juan, you got to love that. It's not just the charm. You know, at the time, don't forget that the left-wing press was dismissing this B-grade actor, this has-been. He's not too smart. He's a cold warrior and all that. Well, that's the reason. What you just saw, Sean, that's the reason people love that guy. Old-fashioned common sense that should be in fashion.
All right, Juan Williams, I have the plan that would balance the budget in 5 years. And tell me where I'm wrong. We're going to hold federal spending where it is now and cut 1 penny out of every dollar every year for 5 years that the government spends. Sound like a good idea to you?
Not at a time when, in fact, the government is not spending money and it's hurting our ability to recover from a very deep recession. You know, Ronald Reagan, in that clip you played, Sean, talked about how deficits impact inflation and drive up inflation. We don't have inflation right now.
Yeah. You know what we have? We have a Fed that's pumping $85 billion a month to prop up our economy. And when they stop feeding that beast, what's going to happen, Governor? What do you think's going to happen?
$17 trillion debt and an economy that's very sick, an unemployment rate that now is sustained 7+. But we know, Sean, we know, Juan, that unemployment is really 10 to 12%. So, and by the way, I talk about this in my book. It's not just the economics of this. It's the whole dependence culture and 50 million people on food stamps and this whole thing that dependence is cool again. So our economy's sick and our culture's sick as well, in my view.
Yeah, you know, and it's also $90 trillion in unfunded liability. But Juan, you're saying no, even though we have trillion-dollar deficits, $7 trillion plus, now going on $8 trillion new Obama debt. You're saying that's not enough. We can still continue to rob future generations blind. That, to me, is a moral issue. Would you ever steal money from your own son who's been on this program? I don't think you would. But we're doing that as a country. We're robbing our kids blind. Why do you support stealing like that? I don't understand it.
Well, you put it in very stark moral terms, but I would also say that we're a country where we have a lot of people, as the governor was just explaining, who are out of work. A lot of people who are underemployed. We're not going to cut 1 penny from this year's budget. We're only going to cut 1 penny out of every dollar we spend. And you're saying we can't live on that. Well, I'm telling you right now, given that the government is a major part of our economy and that the government is pursuing austerity, pulling back, I think we're slowing down economic recovery, slowing down big corporations having the confidence to use the cash they've been stockpiling to hire people, Sean.
All right, so if we're not going to cut, what are we going to do? How much more do you want to spend? Is there any limit to your spending desires?
Sean?
Yeah.
Sean, can I answer that for a second?
Yeah.
And I'm not subscribing this to Juan, but in Congress, this progressive mindset, it could be 17 trillion, it could be 27 trillion, it could be 100 trillion. There literally is no answer to your question there, Sean. It's whatever it takes, and there is no end game, ever.
Reagan raised the question in this one, and it was very simple. Is there a limit to the percentage of people's earnings at which you say that's too much? I've asked you this question. You never give me an answer.
Yes.
Out of every dollar...
I answer you.
Okay, what is it?
I think for me, it's like 35, 40%, and I would stop. But let me just remind you that in Reagan's time, it was higher than that.
What about in New York? You paid another 10 cents. Then you got state tax, state income tax, county tax, property tax, sales tax, hidden tax. Out of every dollar somebody makes, what's the maximum that should go to government, state, local, federal, everywhere?
Well, I don't know how you measure that.
Makes sense.
What, Juan?
Wait. You mean, but Governor, Sean is talking, Sean lives in a high tax area, so you got to understand Sean Hannity. He's upset about the taxes he pays in New York State.
So is every American. Forget me. I'm just a little...
No,
Maryland.
Every American...
Maryland, Juan.
Give me the number.
Didn't have taxes as high as New York, Governor?
Give me the number. What's the number of which government has no right to take any more?
I would say 50%, right?
50 cents out of every dollar. Okay, well, I'm way over that.
Hey, Sean?
Juan. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Hey,
you
Sean,
live in a high tax area.
I would say marginal. I would say a marginal tax rate, adding everything together of around 33 makes sense. And once you get to 50, it's by definition immoral.
Yeah. And by the way, then you get beaten over the head for not wanting to pay a fair share, even though you're paying it. And then you die, and the government comes in and they take another big chunk of the apple. If that's not immoral, and they're robbing from our kids, I don't know what is, Juan Williams. It just doesn't get...
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead,
Can I ask you a question, Sean? Because you've been asking the governor and me, but Sean, I don't get it. You know, you're opposed to the budget deal that was struck today. You know, you don't want the rich and people who have benefited from this great country in this season of charity. You don't want them to say, you know what, we need to help our country get back on its feet. How can you pursue a policy like that, Sean Hannity?
Juan Williams, I pay over 60 cents of every dollar to the government, state, local, federal government. I'm paying my fair share. Please don't beat me over the head with a bat and tell me I'm not.
No.
And
but
whatever little I get to save when I die,
the
government's going to take more, Juan. I'd like to give that to whoever I want to give it to.
All right.